The air was thick with moisture and rot. Sergeant Mason Hale trudged through the underbrush of planet Zaranth, every step a fight against pain and exhaustion. His left arm was bandaged with torn fabric, blood seeping through, and his side burned where shrapnel had grazed bone. The ambush had come out of nowhere. No warning, no chatter on comms. Just explosions, plasma fire, and screaming. His entire squad gone in under 2 minutes. He had run. Not out of cowardice. There was no one left to save. Just survival. Pure, ugly survival. His comm unit was dead. Cracked from the fall, he took tumbling down a ridge. Supplies? Limited. A few ration bars, a mostly empty water flask, and a sidearm with 2 spare mags. The thick jungle pressed around him with alien heat. Vines pulsing like veins, trees hissing as if breathing. Zaranth was alive. Too alive, and it didn't want him there. Mason stumbled into a clearing just as the sun dipped behind the triple canopy. Before him lay the smoldering ruins of a structure. Metal beams twisted, scorched walls half sunken into the earth. Not human architecture. Alien. Charred bodies were scattered among the wreckage, tall, armored, in fragments of ornate plating. His gut clenched. These weren't the enemy. Or were they? The Ax'tarii. 8-foot bipedal warriors, hulking, reptilian, semi-mythical in the eyes of most human forces. The old alliance had collapsed decades ago. Stories floated around. Traitorous, honor-bound to a fault, volatile. But these bodies didn't look like soldiers who'd died in battle. They looked like they'd been slaughtered. Something cracked behind him. Mason spun, sidearm raised, emerging. From the far end of the clearing, stepping over a broken support beam, came a living nightmare. Towering, broad-shouldered, amber-scaled skin streaked with blood and soot. A singular, unblinking gaze locked on him from beneath a half-shattered faceplate. Mason froze. So did the alien. The Ax'tarii warrior was injured. One arm hung limply at his side, a deep gash across his torso seeping black ichor. In his other clawed hand, he held a wicked-looking plasma blade, glowing faintly. "Stay back," Mason warned, voice hoarse. The alien didn't move. Neither of them did. Tension snapped through the humid air like a drawn wire. Mason's mind raced. He couldn't win this fight. Not wounded, not with a pistol. He could barely stand. The alien growled low, in his throat. Not a threat, not quite. Pain, fatigue, then a sound in the jungle. Low and heavy. A crunch of undergrowth. A screech. Guttural and wet. Something massive was circling them both. The alien turned slightly, blade rising. Mason didn't think. He took 3 steps toward the ruined outpost and pressed his back to a half-fallen pillar. The Ax'tarii mirrored him from the other side, placing his weight against the same structure. The predator burst from the trees. A flash of scales and claws, 6-legged, blind-eyed, and fast. It lunged. The Ax'tarii roared and slashed. Mason fired twice, center mass. The creature shrieked and skittered back, then launched again. They moved in tandem. Mason rolled to the side, drawing its attention. Varek. Mason didn't know his name yet, but the alien would have one. Swung wide, blade catching the thing's flank. Blood splattered the ruined wall. One final shot from Mason's pistol took the thing through the eye. It collapsed in a twitching heap. Silence returned, thick and buzzing. Mason stayed crouched, chest heaving. The alien stood towering over the corpse. Slowly, he turned and looked at Mason. Not a word, just nodded. A single, precise gesture. Recognition. Mason stood slowly, hand still near his holster, but he didn't raise it. They were enemies. Maybe. But they were both still breathing. Night fell fast on Zaranth. With no comms and no rescue, Mason knew he had to make camp. He returned to the clearing edge and started pulling together debris, bent, metal for a lean-to, a dry patch beneath a fallen tree. He kept one eye on the alien the whole time. Varek? Because now Mason was sure that was the bastard's name. It felt like a Varek, had slumped against a half-intact wall. He wasn't moving much, just watching. Wounded, like Mason. Outnumbered by the jungle. Maybe worse off. Mason tossed a ration bar across the space between them. It bounced once near the alien's clawed foot. Varek stared at it for a long moment, then picked it up delicately and turned it over in his hands. A low grunt of acknowledgement rumbled from him. He didn't eat it, just held it. By midnight, Mason had managed a crude shelter and a tiny fire made with debris and jungle husks. The smoke was thick but kept the bugs at bay. He ate half a bar, sat in silence. When he finally drifted off, pistol resting on his chest, his last sight was Varek, still sitting at the edge of the clearing, motionless like a stone sentinel. Hours passed. Mason startled awake to the sound of nothing. No buzzing insects, no wind, just breath. A shadow loomed in the firelight. His fingers wrapped around the grip of his sidearm and froze. Varek stood over him. Not threatening, not moving, just standing. Eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Watching. Guarding. Mason's heart pounded, but he didn't reach for the gun. The alien wasn't here to kill him, and in that quiet, flickering moment between exhaustion and fear, a strange truth settled in Mason's mind. They were both still alive, because they'd fought together. By the third day, the jungle was no longer just a death trap, it was a routine. An ugly, dangerous one, sure, but Mason and Varek had found a rhythm. They didn't speak much, couldn't really, but their actions were coordinated now. When Mason scouted ahead, Varek circled wide. When Varek harvested root pods, near the stream, Mason stood watch, sidearm in hand. They moved with the kind of wordless understanding that soldiers learn in combat, except they were two species that should have never cooperated at all. Still, trust didn't come easy. On the fourth day, Mason slipped in the mud, landing hard on his bad leg. Pain shot up his thigh and he shouted in frustration. Varek turned, hesitated, and then approached. For a moment Mason tensed, expecting a show of dominance, or worse, indifference. Instead, Varek extended a massive clawed hand. Mason stared at it, then took it. The alien hoisted him up like he weighed nothing. That night, beneath the crude shelter they'd reinforced with metal plating and giant leaves, Mason cracked open his medkit. Varek had a long wound down his side, stitched hastily with what looked like dried plant fibers. It was festering. "Let me," Mason said, lifting a vial of antiseptic spray. Varek rumbled low in his throat. "Not quite a warning? I'm not going to poison you, big guy. You'd have gutted me already if that was your plan." He approached, slowly, and to his surprise, the Ax'tarii held still. The armor plating along Varek's flank shifted, revealing more of the wound. With careful hands, Mason cleaned the injury, then sprayed synth skin across it, watching the tissue knit. Together, Varek exhaled, almost a sigh. "Almost trust. You got a name?" Mason asked as he sealed the last bit. The alien tapped his chest. "Varek." "Varek," Mason echoed, nodding. "I'm Mason." A pause. Then, "Mason." Close enough. For the first time, Mason heard something like a laugh. It was rough, like rocks grinding underwater, but it was unmistakably amused. He laughed too. That's probably the best pronunciation I've heard all week. They spoke in fragments, gestures. Varek understood enough galactic standard to exchange basic ideas. Mason learned that the Ax'tarii was once a sentinel, some kind, of elite guardian caste. But when Mason asked more, Varek's face darkened. "Clanless now," he said quietly. Mason blinked. "Exiled?" Varek didn't answer, just stared into the fire. That night, Mason dreamed. No, not dreamed, saw a memory. He saw Varek standing in a vast hall of stone and light before others of his kind seated on thrones, a human diplomat. An old woman with sharp eyes and a scar down her cheek stood behind him, wounded but alive. Varek faced the throne. "I did what was right," he said, voice echoing across the chamber. A voice replied, cold and final. You broke the code. You are stripped of title, of clan, of blood, of... Mason jolted awake, drenched in sweat. Varek was already awake, sitting cross-legged, watching the tree line, as if he'd felt the memory too. You saved one of ours, Mason muttered, and they cast you out. Varek didn't move, but his jaw tightened. A slow nod followed. Why? Mason asked. Why help a human? The Ax'tarii didn't answer with words. He pointed at Mason's chest, then his own, then held up 2 fingers and touched them together. 2 warriors, 1 cause. On the 6th day, the jungle came for them again. They were foraging near a dense ravine when the ground trembled beneath their feet. Birds, huge, leathery things, erupted from the canopy. The trees snapped like toothpicks. It was another predator, larger than the first, and hungry. It burst from the brush, 12 feet tall, armored like a tank, with a mouth lined in concentric rings of bone and chitin. It charged. Varek roared and slammed his fist against his chest, then surged, forward blade drawn. Mason flanked left, staying low, firing controlled bursts at the creature's flanks. The beast reared back and vomited a stream of corrosive bile. Mason ducked, rolled, narrowly missing a spray that melted an entire tree into sludge. Varek leapt onto the beast's back, driving his plasma blade into its spine. It howled and bucked, throwing him hard into a rock face. Mason! The voice wasn't human, wasn't Ax'tarii. It was inside his head, booming like a thunderclap. Mason froze mid-step. The beast lunged for him. Instinct took over. He dodged, shoved his last grenade into the thing's open maw and dove. Boom. The jungle shook. Black ichor rained from the trees. Mason rose slowly, ears ringing. Varek lay crumpled nearby, motionless. No, no, no. Mason scrambled to him, rolling the massive body over. The alien stirred, groaned, alive. He coughed once and said weakly, Together. You move like clan brother. Mason stared, breathless. Varek reached up with a shaking hand and touched 2 fingers to his forehead, then extended them outward, then tapped his chest. A salute. A ritual gesture. Without fully knowing why, Mason mirrored it. Varek nodded once, then said in that deep gravel voice, You have bonded. Mason blinked. What does that mean? The Ax'tarii met his eyes. There was no trace of humor now. It means, he said solemnly, you are now of my kin. Mason awoke to a sharp tingle along his forearm. He blinked blearily and raised it to the morning light filtering through the canopy. There, just beneath the skin, shimmered a faint geometric pattern. Lines and symbols that glowed a pale, soft blue. It pulsed slowly, in time with his heartbeat. He rubbed at it. The mark didn't smear. It wasn't ink or injury. Varek sat, nearby cross-legged, watching him. You marked me? Mason asked, not angry, just stunned. Varek rose and approached, then crouched beside him. He touched the same place on his own arm where a mirrored mark glowed with stronger intensity. The bond, he said, that thing you said yesterday. Varek nodded. When warriors fight side by side, save each other, spill blood in same breath, the spirits see. They seal the bond. It cannot be broken. Mason stared at his arm again. The glow had no heat, but it felt alive. He didn't fully understand, but something about it settled deep in his gut. The ache of loneliness he'd carried since the ambush, since his squad was wiped out, shifted. It didn't vanish, but it lessened. And this is permanent? He asked. Varek nodded solemnly. Even in death. I feel you now. You feel, eh? Mason laughed weakly. What, like a soul buddy system? Varek tilted his head. We are brothers. You laugh, I feel the echo. You hurt, I bleed. Jesus. Who is Jesus? Mason chuckled again. He'd have a hell of a time explaining this. They broke camp quickly. Varek led now, navigating terrain Mason could barely parse. The Ax'tari's instincts for flora, Predator tracks and camouflage were unmatched, and he began sharing survival techniques as they moved. Mason picked up fast. Varek seemed to take pride in teaching, offering brief corrections in his gravelly speech. 3 hours later, they reached high ground, and through the vine-strangled canopy, Mason saw a broken silhouette, a crashed shuttle, likely a survey or scout vessel. The tail fin was sheared clean off and one side of the hull had been gutted by fire, but the comms array on top looked intact. Long-range beacon? Mason asked hopefully. Maybe, Varek said. Too far to tell if systems live. They descended toward it cautiously, following a dry stream bed. That's when they heard it. Metal scraping against metal, the crackle of laughter, and then voices in both human English and alien trade dialects. Mason ducked and peered through a gap in the brush. His stomach turned. A group of 10 human mercenaries flanked by a few heavily armed reptilian aliens. They wore mismatched gear, most of it scavenged. The humans' insignias had been scrubbed clean. Mason whispered, "These bastards attacked our outpost." Varek was silent, but his entire body vibrated with fury. "You know them?" Mason asked. Varek's eyes burned. "They killed my brothers, slaughtered Ax'tarii sentinels, then blamed humans. Said we turned on peace, pact, lies." Mason's blood ran cold. "They wanted war. Profit from chaos," Varek said bitterly. "They sold truth for credits." One of the mercs kicked the shuttle door open, barking orders to rip out the comms array. They didn't want it used. They wanted this crash, forgotten. Varek growled low. Then Mason felt it. Heat in his chest, not from rage, but something deeper. His heartbeat synced with Varek's. Adrenaline surged in his limbs, not just his own. He turned to the alien. "You feel that?" Varek nodded. "The bond calls us. Fight. Or run." Mason checked his rifle. "I'm tired of running." They moved. It wasn't a charge, but a precision ambush. Varek dropped from above, landing like a meteor, cleaving through the first merc with a war cry that shook the leaves. Mason picked targets, taking out 2 guards before they could raise alarms. But the mercs were trained, organized. Gunfire lit the jungle. Mason ducked behind the shuttle's twisted door, exchanging fire with 2 reptilian aliens flanking the perimeter. He saw Varek go down on one knee, hit in the shoulder by a plasma bolt. Pain seared Mason's arm at the same moment. Phantom agony. He nearly cried out. The bond was real. Every hit Varek took, Mason felt. Every time Mason's breath quickened, Varek mirrored it. They weren't just teammates now. They were connected. It hurt like hell, but it also drove them harder. Mason pushed forward, using the pain as a compass. He and Varek moved as one blocked, the other struck. When Mason's clip ran dry, Varek hurled a dead merc's blade through a retreating sniper. They dropped the last of the group together, back to back, breathing hard, then silence. The jungle seemed to hush. Blood dripped into the soil. The stench of burned metal and singed leaves hung thick in the air. Mason collapsed to his knees, panting. He turned to Varek, who was bleeding badly from the side again. "No," Mason said, crawling over. "You're not dying. Not now." He ripped open his medkit, slathering synth foam across the wound. "You stupid, stubborn, terrifying bastard," Varek grunted, half-conscious. "Still alive." "Barely." Mason sat beside him, arm throbbing from the bond's echo, and looked. "At the battlefield, you and me," he said softly. "We survive together, no matter what." Varek stirred. His lips moved slowly, forming the words with difficulty but unmistakable purpose. Blood and bond. The jungle gave way to scorched earth and twisted wreckage. The second shuttle, smaller, sleeker, had crashed deeper into a canyon of stone, its hull half melted and sparking faintly in the humid air. The comms array was intact but blackened, silent, too quiet. Varek sniffed the air and growled low. "Trap." Mason nodded. Yeah, smells like bait. They moved in a slow arc around the debris, weapons drawn, senses sharpened. The bond between them thrummed like a living thread, a pulse they no longer questioned. When Varek tensed, Mason ducked before he even saw the glint of the sentry drone. When Mason raised his rifle, Varek flanked without needing a signal. They were more than soldiers now. They were instinct, made flesh. A shot cracked the air. Mason rolled behind a half-melted support strut as energy turrets snapped to life, glowing red and sweeping the clearing. AI still online, Mason hissed. Mercenary pattern. Kill anything non-registered. Varek's eyes narrowed. Then we burn their ghosts. They split in opposite directions, drawing turret fire, zigzagging through debris. Mason fired short bursts, trying to keep the AI distracted. Varek scaled a broken stabilizer tower, leaping across beams like a panther. The turrets tracked them too fast. One clipped Mason's thigh. He stumbled, teeth gritted. The pain was sharp, but worse was the echo. Varek staggered, a mirror, pulse of agony in his chest. The bond was turning against them, now amplifying damage. Mason hit the ground behind a chunk of metal plating, panting. He did the math. If they kept moving together, they'd both bleed out before reaching the core node. I've got one move, he muttered, pulling a flare grenade. Varek landed beside him, crouched low. You feel it too? Mason asked. The Ax'tarii nodded grimly. I'll draw it, Mason said, tightening the last of his bandages. You hit the node. No. Mason gripped his arm hard. I've got one shot left. You have the strength to finish it. Varek didn't answer at first. Then he bowed his head, pressing his forehead briefly to Mason's, a gesture they'd never done before. Not until now. I will come back, Varek said, voice low and hoarse. Mason smiled. Yeah, that's the deal. Then he ran, straight, into the open. The AI responded instantly, turrets recalibrating, scanning, locking. Mason threw the flare high into the air, flaring it bright red against the hazy sky. It bought him seconds. He dove, fired wildly, screamed. The fire came in waves, hot, deafening. He felt his side tear open, heard the crunch of a cracked rib. He hit the ground and didn't get up, but he'd bought the moment. Varek moved like a phantom, ducking low and silent across the battlefield. He reached the node, a partially buried console wedged in the base of the shuttle's spine. One mighty swing of his blade severed the control cable. The lights across the turrets died with a shriek of static. Silence fell. Then, footsteps, heavy, urgent. Mason felt arms lift him, careful but powerful. He groaned, barely conscious. Did we win? Varek knelt beside him, cradling his body. You bled for me. Now I carry you. Through the bond, Mason felt the deep ache of sorrow beneath Varek's words, not grief. Defiance. He passed out. He awoke sometime later to flashing lights above the canopy, spotlights from a descending ship. Human voices filtered through the air, commands barked, boots trampling over broken metal. A squad of soldiers approached the wreckage cautiously, weapons up. But they stopped when they saw the giant Ax'tarii warrior kneeling beside a fallen human, refusing to move. The squad leader stepped forward, incredulous. Put the human down. Varek bared his teeth, not in threat, but in warning. He is of my blood, my bond. I will not leave him behind. The officer faltered. The scanners confirmed the man he held was Sergeant Mason Hale, MIA for over a week, somehow alive. And the Ax'tarii wasn't attacking. He was protecting. A medic came close. Varek stood slowly, carrying Mason like he weighed nothing. The medic took him gently. The Ax'tarii let go, but never took his eyes off him. Weeks passed. In a sterile medical bay aboard the cruiser Red Ark, Mason Hale opened his eyes to the soft hum of machinery. Tubes in his arm, stitches in his ribs. Pain dulled by medicine, but the bond still buzzed, faint and constant, like a heartbeat in the back of his skull. He turned his head. Varek sat silently in the corner, still impatient. Mason croaked. You came back. Varek stood. I said I would. Slowly he extended his right hand, not in aggression but in ceremony. Fist closed, fingers to chest. The warrior's salute. This time Mason understood. He rose shakily and returned it, pressing his fist to his heart. No translator needed. No words. Two warriors. One bond. Not just of survival, but of something far rarer. Trust between worlds.